afternoon, parents. Hope that you guys are all doing really well. I hope Sunday school went well for you this past week. Please, can I ask you a favor? Won't you post some pictures and videos, so memory verses, perhaps some of the activities or challenges that I give to you. Won't you record them while you're doing your time together and post it to that Facebook page that we've created? It is a private account. We are approving only the current Southern Cross members into that group, and I just thought it would be a nice way for us to load up some pictures and some videos for us to be able to see each other, to be encouraged by what everyone else is doing, and to keep going on a Sunday morning with our families. So this coming Sunday, we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 26. We're going to pick up from verse 31 and we're going to go through to verse 75. But we're not going to be dealing with each verse specifically. We're going to be looking at it as a whole. And in particular, we're going to be looking at the theme of Peter denying Jesus. So what do we need to know as we go into this passage on Sunday? We need to realize that this episode marks one of the worst days in Peter's relationship with Jesus. It occurs immediately after the Last Supper, where Jesus predicted his betrayal by Judas. So if you flip back in your Bible, you'll see Matthew 26, verse 25. Jesus has the Last Supper with his disciples. And all the disciples, except for Judas, are here with Jesus on the Mount of Olives. And Jesus is preparing to die. And he goes off alone to pray. And if you remember, this is not the first time that Jesus has done this. He prays alone whenever he must resist the temptation to become a political king instead of going to the cross. And so what's important for us to note here is that Jesus withdraws and he goes to pray. He goes to his Father at a point in his life and a point in his ministry where he is facing temptation, where he is tempted to take an easy road opposed to the road that God has laid out for him. We need to remember that Jesus, well, in this moment, we see Jesus' humanity and we see his divinity. We see that Jesus understands and he knows the purpose for which he has come and why God has sent him. But we also see his humanity as he cries out to God. And in particular here, as he goes and he prays to God to help him as he knows what lies ahead of him. But here is where we see a sharp contrast between Jesus and the disciples when it comes to facing temptation. Peter confidently says that he will stand by Jesus even to the point of death. I love Peter in verse 33. He says, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. And we know what's just about to come, don't we? You see, when temptation comes to Peter to avoid persecution, his confidence gives way to fear and he denies and he deserts Jesus. So let's take a look now at a few of these verses and just unpack a little bit of its meaning so that on Sunday morning you can help your children as you read through this passage together. All right, let's have a verse 33 to 34. This is what I mentioned just a few minutes earlier. This is so typical of Peter's impulsive character, but Jesus cautions Peter and he predicts his denial. Then verse 35, Peter refuses to accept Jesus' prediction. He is not the only one who says that he will die. The disciples also say the same. Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. Then verse 37, it says, he took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. So James and John are the sons of Zebedee, and Jesus had a close relationship with them and with Peter, and they are the only three that Jesus takes with him to raise Jairus' daughter. You can read that story in Mark chapter 5, verse 37. And here he takes them with him as he goes to pray. Then verse 39, Jesus refers to the cup. It says, going a little further, he fell down with his face to the ground and he prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. The cup that Jesus is referring to, and we'll deal with this, I'll post a little video for the children on Sunday, but just so you know, the cup that Jesus refers to, it is a cup that is filled with the wrath of God. And it's as if Jesus is now going to have to drink this cup that is full of the wrath of God. So that's the picture that Jesus used to speak of his death. And what we see here in verse 39 is in Jesus's prayer, we see two sides of one coin. We see Jesus praying for what he wants. He says, may this cup be taken from me. And so Jesus here comes before God with a prayer, with a concern on his heart. And he says, may this cup be taken from me. But the flip side of that coin is that he prays, but not my will, but yours be done. And he abandons himself to God. Then verse 40, already Peter is beginning to fail Jesus. He says in verse 35 he's never going to desert Jesus, but he can't even stay awake when Jesus asks him to at this very difficult time. Verse 41, we see that Peter has a willing spirit. He's zealous for Jesus, but he cannot live up to what he claims in verse 35. To avoid temptation, Jesus tells him that he needs to be alert and prayerful. You see, human action and God's power is necessary. Verse 41, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. This is a really fantastic truth for you and I to take on board in our lives. How often do we give into temptation and we think, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that, or why do I keep giving into temptation? Well, we need to ask ourselves the question, are you being watchful? Are you being prayerful? Because that's what Jesus says we need in order for us not to fall into temptation. And I think this is a really fantastic truth for us to be able to teach our children, to teach them that as they face temptations, they need to watch their life carefully, and they need to make sure that they are living their lives praying to God, asking him to help them as they face temptations. Then verse 42 to 45, Peter and the brothers failed Jesus repeatedly. Verse 51, here we see Peter again getting very enthusiastic. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. That was Peter. Peter was still hoping that Jesus would be a political king and not a suffering king. Verse 58, Peter then continues to follow Jesus at a distance. And if you want to go look in John chapter 18, verse 15 to 16, we see that he only actually enters into the courtyard because he's with John, and John knows the high priest. Then just notice in verse 70 to 74, where Peter denies Jesus, notice how his denials get stronger each time. He is afraid and he begins to act irrationally. He is desperate to avoid getting into trouble for being with Jesus. But then verse 75, it says, then Peter immediately remembered. So it's as the rooster crowed, we're told. That is the trigger point for Peter. The rooster crows and Peter weeps bitterly. He remembered the words spoken before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Peter is genuinely sorry for what he did in disowning Jesus, not just once, but 3 times. Hi mums and dads, I thought that we would play a fun quiz on Sunday morning, but it does require a little bit of prep, so I thought I'd mention it to you now so that you can get those things ready. The way the game works is that you will divide your family into 2. You can try and figure out if there's a way you can play it as a unit, but the way it works is you would have 2 teams, and you'd ask a question to the one team. They would then come forward and they would stick their hand into a bag and they would remove a peg. So I'm going to explain the game to you using pegs, but feel free to adjust it if you don't have the necessary pegs. You can use anything else to make the game work. So I'm going to take 5 pink pegs, 5 blue pegs, and those will be my 2 teams. They will go into the bag. I will also add in a green peg, which will be worth 5 points, and then I'll also add in 2 white pegs. Those 2 pegs, if they get taken out of the bag, it flattens the team's score back down to 0. So the way the game works is you all those pegs go into one bag. You ask a question. If they get it right, one team member can come up and take a peg out of the bag. If it is their color, then they get 1 point. If it's the other team's color, it just gets discarded. It doesn't matter. They can keep going as long as they want to. They can decide when they want to stop removing pegs from the bag. So they will accumulate points by pulling out their own pegs. So 1 point per peg. And then obviously if they pull out the green peg, they'll get an additional 5 points. They have to then decide when their turn is over. Obviously, there's the risk of them pulling out the white peg and their score will go down to 0, and it automatically then, their turn is automatically ended and it'll go to the other team. I've used in the past, instead of pegs, we've got a box of poker chips. So those have worked quite well, but it basically has to be something that feels the same, that they won't be able to feel around and differentiate between the different values of the pigs. So that's what we're going to do on Sunday. It's a lot of fun. The kids really enjoy. So please do prepare for it and put the effort in. It's a lot of fun, and I hope that you'll be able to get some good discussion also going over the passage as you ask your kids the questions. Let me know if anything is unclear, but I will also post the picture of the description and the rules of the game.